Layla, I think you mentioned something really interesting, which is that in the Palestinian church, the men and women are separate. And you see, this is the thing, like there isn't much.
It's Arab culture, because it's not because people perceive Christianity as something European, but they forget that we are Arab by culture.
Exactly.
And all our behaviors are so Arab. We're very conservative in dressing, we're very conservative, we're very firm on women and gender. We kill girls sometimes, like we have incidents where girls were killed because they've done something, or they are outspoken about their sexuality. It's not something that we talk about because we are in an Arab culture. We're Arabs first,
Yeah.
and then we are Christians.
Well, this is the thing. It's not clear to me the extent to which Arab or Islamic culture has influenced this, because, for example, in Morocco, in a lot of the mosques, they separate the men and the women, but the women pray on the top floor, so they don't pray behind the men, right? And I believe Talha is in the chat, he will know more about this, but I believe that historically, that used to be the case in many ancient Arab mosques, where the women wouldn't necessarily pray behind, but they may pray to the side, or they would pray on the top floor. So it could be Arab culture that's influencing this, the segregation in churches in Palestine, or Islamic culture, but it's not clear to me. I don't know if anyone else has an opinion, or maybe Syria, for example.
It still happens in lots of other parts of the world. So I notice women praying above men. I notice from Turkey too. And I think in Kuwait, there's I know of at least one mosque where they actually pray side by side. The main mosque, even if I'm not the central.
Is it mixed, or is it left and right, like one?
No, it's left and right. It's not mixed.
Yeah,
they
yeah.
Pray, at least in Ramadan. Oh my God, I don't know. I shouldn't have said. But I don't think it's just a Moroccan thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to comment on what Layla was saying about this difference between culture and religion, because I think it's a really, really important point. And I think it often gets overlooked, right? So when I was preparing for the talk, this is one of the things that I said, okay, that is really, really, really key to take into account if we speak about religion, culture, and gender, right? I think a lot of people don't get this right. They just assume, there's also this assumption that Christianity is Western per se, right? And that Arabs are Muslim. I remember a couple of years ago when we had these huge debates about refugees coming into Europe from the Middle East and South Asia. There were people in Germany, where I'm from, who were saying, oh, let's just take in the Christians because integration will be easy. And it made me laugh, because clearly they didn't know what they were talking about, right? But it's so widespread. This assumption that there's an overlap between culture and religion, and it's just not the case.
I can add to what Jennifer you were saying, and responding to Osama's question is also it's all about class. So, for example, in cities, you would see churches, people are mixed. If you see it in a village, in a small village where I come from, it's separated. It's also about with the culture that is like urban and non-urban. We come from a small village where people have a different culture from a big city where people are more modernized, let's say, or in a different place where mixing people is different. Because for us, we live in a culture where if somebody or a stranger comes in, the men sit with them, and then the women would be separated as well. So it's part of a holistic culture in wherever that you are. So if you're in the city, it's more comfortable to sit with men, if not. So it's also about class and adding all these other differences.
I mean, a culture in itself, I mean, for me, the way I think about religion and culture, or like, for example, when we have discussions with friends and family about religion, at least in the context of Islam, the history of it, and whether, like there are these arguments that claim that a lot of religions are patriarchal in nature, and so like I challenge that argument, though there is some truth to it, but it's still worth challenging. So, for example, like when we look at the history of Islam, and there's definitely an there's evidence for different differences in genders between men and women, absolutely. And so I was angry with that for a while, that like how, as a Muslim woman, how do I prescribe to a religion that historically, for example, had some part of oppression, like for example, what do you call them, Jawari. So I don't know what that is in English. In any case, so I came to peace with it by looking at religion in the historical sense from the context of culture. So culturally, during that time, that's what was known. These were the norms and these were the values. And so religion it doesn't come in a mutually exclusive bubble. It doesn't exist just on its own. It exists within the context of culture. So evidently it's going to progress and change through the culture. So from the time of the prophet to now, Islam is not the same, and the Arab culture, whatever that is, it's no longer the same. So that even just defining culture, like putting it in some sort of a one narrative, is very problematic. And so like that's why I often, when I think of religion and culture, I think of forgot his first name, but Tweed, who created a theory of religion, and he says that he defines religions with an S to be confluences of organic cultural flows. That's how he defines religions. And that
I think for me it would also be important to distinguish between lived religion, right, and how people practice religion, and then theology on the other hand.
yes.
I feel often people speak about religion and they don't really clearly define their terms. And they might disagree on something, and the only reason for their disagreement is that one of them is speaking about theology and one of them is speaking about how people practice this religion, right, which might be in line with the theological principles, or maybe not, right?
And then I think that's like that comes from the assumption of a monolithic community, that like all Muslims must, or all Christians must follow the same thing, and therefore, you know, whatever as a community practitioners do, it reflects the theology. I think that's the assumption. And at least in the context of Islam, I find it extremely problematic when they say Muslims. I mean, what is Muslim and who is Muslim?
And even in theology, there's diversity, right? I mean, especially if you speak about Islam, but also even Christianity as well. There's diversity as well, even on a theological level. So
it's, I think, combining that, Jennifer, I think you said something very interesting about people take some religious practices and they take them as a religious culture, and then becomes the culture of something, and then it gets referred to religions like, no, this is how we should do that as Muslims, but then it's actually a practice, not something part of the theology that you could refer to, and then this is where it gets mainstreamed, and then this is where it gets pinned on to say all Muslims should do this and this and that, because it became a culture somehow, because the practices were taken away and they don't do the distinction or definitions inside any religion, which is really interesting. And it's in many religions, not only Islam but also Christianity. It becomes a culture of not distinction only, but discrimination. Like they use that in a negative way, where they take it as like, all Muslims do that, or all Muslims say that. So for example, I'd say that it's a safe space to say that, but sometimes it's taken, like we had an argument, because we usually get that. It's sometimes we get discriminated against, like if somebody dies and it's in the news and it's somebody Christian, and then you go into comments and it happened once. It's like, oh, you shouldn't say God have mercy on their soul because they're not Muslims. Or if they want to say a dua, or they want to do a prayer, it's like, oh, God save all the Muslims, or have mercy on the Muslim dead only. And then it becomes specific, and some people get angry. And this anger becomes like, oh, we're discriminated against, they hate us, they don't like us, they only say that like, oh, God save the Muslims and not the other ones, etc. But then I say, it's my understanding of it, it's like, it's a culture. It's like it began maybe in a mosque, somebody is praying in a Friday prayer and says, and this does this dua for the Muslims because they are praying, doing that, and then becomes a culture, and then becomes prevalent, but then it becomes overthinking, where it has more impact rather than being, it could be, for me, it means somebody is wishing like wishing well for all the Muslim fellows from the same belief. But for others, it looks like they're only wishing that for themselves. What do they mean? Do they mean that they wish worse or bad for the other ones? So it's practices that are taking against religion itself. So Islam doesn't say they want only to have mercy on Muslims. They want to have mercy on all the people. It doesn't matter. But if somebody takes this practice and uses it against the religion itself. And this is where the divine happens, where the practices and cultures of people of that religion is taking against the religion itself. And we see that in many places, even with the Christians as well, in other examples.
And that's where context becomes so important again, right? Like you could say something that would make complete sense within an, let's say, Muslim-only space, right? Let's say, I don't know, a country where you literally have only Muslims, and but that would be a very specific context, right? So maybe they would say it there and they wouldn't give it another thought because everyone would understand what they mean by it. But then if you said something like this in a multicultural society, right, in a multi-ethnic or multi-religious society, then clearly it would cause offense because it just wouldn't work, right?
But sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes, for example, I'm more comfortable expressing my opinion that I strongly, genuinely believe with somebody like Layla, who's an Arab Christian, or somebody like Shada, who has a very specific North African take of Islam, than with Muslims who can disregard my opinion, and sometimes that closes the discussion. And if another Muslim thinks that my opinion on these issues is wrong, then they've eliminated all possibility of correcting or refining my perspective by not engaging in the conversation, right? Look, the person that comes to mind, the example that comes to mind is Ayaan Hirsi Ali Hirsi, right? Now, I find her views very problematic because I don't understand what she's trying to achieve. Are you trying to improve the condition of Black Muslim women, or are you trying to sell a book, right? Or do you have a journey of liberation that you genuinely struggle with, okay? I think it's a combination of point 2 and point 3, okay? And the reason I say this is because when you disregard your culture, you come out of it, you don't engage with the problematic people in your culture, you talk to the ideological echo chamber that would agree with you anyway and will not substantially alleviate the problem for other people like yourself, and you assume that, for example, female genital mutilation is a Muslim specific thing, and you go down and you peddle this narrative and you paint it. For example, I didn't know about FGM until I heard Ayaan talk about it. Like this, I know that in Egypt it's an issue, in Somalia it's an issue, in Ethiopia it can be. I'm not sure what the stats are in Ethiopia. In Morocco, I was completely unaware of the discussion. Then suddenly I deal with Islamophobes online who tell me that it's in my culture that all women are treated in this way. Right? So she's peddling an irresponsible narrative that actually exacerbates the oppression of Muslim women. Be nuanced about it, be responsible about it, and think about your impact on other people. It's not just, and just one last thing, right? It's not as simple, you cannot, this is a controversial point. Jennifer's going to disagree with this, right? Now, I don't think you can just...
Are you sure you want to do this, Osama? Are you sure you want to go there?
Look, I don't think you can just leave Islamic culture or leave your identity. There are parts of Islamic culture that are beyond the religion, that are ingrained in the way that you say salam to somebody, or the way you eat at the table, or the way you communicate. It's intersectional. We've all agreed in this chat that culture and religion have overlaps, right? You can...
But is it, Osama, is it Islamic culture, or is it Arab or Oriental or Middle Eastern culture? Because what you see, I mean, I know Chinese Muslims, right? So if you decide you don't want to be a Muslim anymore, right? Like maybe a lot about the way that you behave, that you think, your attitudes, norms, expectations, all of that. Maybe that wouldn't change a lot, but that's because you're still Arab or North African or whatever, right?
Yes, but...
Yeah, but a Chinese Muslim, if he stopped being Muslim, right? Like it would be different because his culture is different. It was like the example that Leila gave earlier about who was it, like Muslims from different parts of the world. Was it Malaysia? You mentioned Malaysia.
Indonesia.
Indonesia, exactly. So they're so different. Oh my God, like they're so different.